All right. All right. Five, four, three, two, one.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Eskin. On behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our nonprofit empowerment webinar series. This is number 56, and this one is about raising big money from millennials, the next generation. Hey, Michael, is that, I have a sign on. Is that, can we, okay. Can that be taken off? I have a big sign on that says this meeting is being recorded.
See if you can close out of it. I'm not seeing that, but we are recording.
It says leave meeting, so I don't want to do that. Okay, I
Okay.
have to move it around a little. I am glad to have as my guest a relatively new friend, and Alyssa, I am so glad that we have met. Alyssa Wright is, I call her the first lady of millennial philanthropy. So, in all fairness, there's no man that's her equal either. I've been starting to count. We have a couple of things in common. Number one, Alyssa was born in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, right? I
Yes,
was
sir.
born. I was born in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We both have a passion for lobster rolls. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
And I think your geography gives you a little edge on that. And we also have a passion for philanthropy. And I thought the best way, Alyssa's been so open. Most of the questions are going to be about millennials. But since I got someone like her, and by the way, she is a millennial. I'm a baby boomer. Alyssa, I have to say, I'm a little mad at you. I can't believe how much you've already accomplished in your career. She is a prolific writer for Fortune magazine, a speaker, a TED Talk presenter, a consultant, a coach. She's had clients literally around the world. So I watched her TED Talk again last night and was all about claiming your philanthropy. And I think part of the message that we have to get across philanthropy is that, and I agree with you, it's a scary sound word. Okay. You said it's somewhere between philosophy and ecology. And you talked about, I think you were 22 years old and you became philanthropically committed. Can you talk about that philanthropy? Sure, it's the super wealthy, but the rest of us can participate through times commensurate with our resources.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you, Jim, for such a warm and kind welcome. It's nice to feel a little bit of a kindred spirit, kicking off this today and getting to know you over the last few weeks.
Yes.
My own story is really rooted in, I grew up in an environment that was really tumultuous. I grew up in a house with a lot of mental health issues, and actually moved out a few days after my 18th birthday, and kind of went identityless and sort of familyless into the world. And so a big part of claiming my philanthropy for me was getting involved in community. And as we all know, the root of the word philanthropy is love of humanity. And so as a kid who grew up feeling really unloved and unwanted by some of the traditional structures that were supposed to love and make me feel wanted, I threw myself into my community to love it back.
By the
And
way,
to kind
if
of
I did my homework, did you learn that definition from Jennifer Buffett? Was it?
I did, yeah. So one of my first fundraising gigs was going to a fancy fundraising event at the Cipriani in New York. I don't know if anybody's ever been to the Cipriani, but they do big, schwanky, fancy fundraising events there, and all the celebrities and influencers come. And Jennifer Buffett, I was put at a table with Jennifer Buffett and a few other really high net worth, high profile folks, and was this kind of kid from rural Mass. And the next thing that I knew, I said to her, I don't know what I'm doing here. And she turned to look at me and she goes, listen to the speech I give tonight, she said, and you'll know exactly why you've shown up in this work, because she had gotten to know me a little bit in the weeks that preceded that event. And yeah, she said philanthropy was the love of humanity. And to your earlier question, Jim, I think all of us have ways of resourcing and loving our communities and giving back. And I don't think we've expanded on the term enough of philanthropists. I think we've made it exclusive to the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts of the world.
Right.
And so a big big important thing I think for all of us to think about is how we define philanthropy beyond just financial capital, and really think about all the other different types of capital, social, intellectual, emotional, physical, spiritual, that we bring to this work to make it flourish.
Alyssa, you're a millennial, you're super active in the workplace. What did you like about working remotely from home, and what didn't you like?
So in full disclosure, I have a rescue puppy and a 2-year-old. So both of those elements in the house were a little difficult when you're trying to have donor conversations or teach or be the MC for a fundraising event. So I had a little bit of a struggle with that. But I think the thing I loved about working remotely was how much time I actually got for things like nature connection, like being outside on calls or being able to stop in the middle of the day and go for a walk. I share my partner was home, so my husband William and I, we were able to actually spend a lot more time together, which had both good and bad impacts, I think, on the work environment. But I think being able to work remotely really rooted me and connected me more to my community, to my family, to the land that I live on, and so that's been a big positive.
I'm going to try you this, and then we are going to go. 89% of our questions will be about millennials and philanthropy. But also our audience includes nonprofit professionals and volunteers. I mean, and if I hear the word pivot one more time, but probably we're now at another moment of pivoting because we're beginning very slowly to go back to the traditional workplace. And what might be your advice for either people who have never worked in fundraising or have been in fundraising and now they think it's a good time to consider a career move?
Yeah, I think anyone considering making a transition right now, I think it's really important to think about, I always think about how do I serve the sector. So about 4 years ago when I started my own practice, I really, I was coming into it as basically a major gifts officer for the majority of my career up until that moment, while having done, a lot of different types of fundraising work. But I remember thinking and doing a little bit of a skills assessment and maybe a little bit of a heart assessment on kind of who I was and how I was showing up in the field and what I had learned, on a heart, mind, and on a heart and imagination level, as much as what I had learned on an intellectual level, and what I could really bring to the table. And so I would say in this moment, what's really important is that if you're in a place of transition, think about the skills you have as a fundraiser, which what we know all know the root of those are relationship building, and where can you shift in the sector to help build more relationships. A good friend of mine actually now is working at a impact investment firm as more of a customer relations, a donor relations manager there. She's still making the same impact around the issues that she cares about, but she's kind of shape shifted a little bit, and now she's on more of a corporate side. So I just feel like it's really important to not also, think about the things that you learned, or I was joking earlier, I've gotten a lot of much more effective cooking and writing skills over the last year, doing a lot of journaling and baking and all of that. So, I think it's really important to just, appreciate and honor those skills too, because now maybe you want to transition to a role where, even though it wasn't something specific to professional development, now it's a skill and a part of who you are, and you should definitely bring it out and put it on the table.
Let's go to another macro question. What do you think we learned about American philanthropy over this crazy year, 2020?
Yeah, so I think the first thing we realized is that relationships are so precious and our people matter more than anything. I watched organizations last year who, called up donors for the first time and just said, you know what, like, I'm sorry, I don't have time for all the cultivation this year. We're cutting staff. We have a high demand and need of our programs. A lot of stuff is going on. We're not going to be able to put our event on the same way, but we actually need you to double our gift. There was like radical honesty and vulnerability last year. And I really hope that we don't lose that in our space, because there's a lot of things that we do as fundraisers and development professionals that, to be really candid, I think are just silly at the end of the day, because they distract from mission making. They overwhelm us. They burn us out. And I was really grateful to donors last year who said to me, oh, geez, you're right. Why did we do that at the event every year? That took you how long to put that auction together? I would give you $5,000 instead of you spending 60 hours raising $5,000. There were a lot of things that I saw kind of shed and fall away because we had radically honest conversations with donors. And I really hope that that doesn't disappear. And to Jim, your slide right here, I do think we proved that virtual fundraising definitely
I
works
was
as
about
well.
to say there that you and I didn't just go to conferences, we taught conferences that if you were going to ask for a gift, the gold standard was getting a face-to-face meeting. And so my question is, what are your conclusions where virtual fundraising worked and where it fell short?
Yeah. So I think where virtual fundraising definitely worked was where, there was an investment in technology that allowed you to build relationships. So there's a lot of technologies out there that I think allowed people to kind of just take the gala toolkit and shift it to still be kind of, presentational and, a lot of recorded videos and things like that. But I think where there was technology used that fostered relationships, where people went into VIP rooms, where they did breakout groups, where they got a specific connection in the space, where they can actually build relationships. I think that made a big difference in terms of virtual fundraising. And the other positive is that we saw a pretty extensive reach. So this morning, I actually was speaking at the kickoff for New Hampshire Give Day for New Hampshire. It's their 24-hour giving campaign. They did a little coffee hour this morning. And one of the things that I said to them was the perks of this year is that y'all have a lot of new donors that are not in New Hampshire because you did your virtual events last year and had regional and national folks attend them.
Wow.
So reach out to
what
all
a
those
great opportunity, right? What a great opportunity.
It's huge. So I think that's a big thing we need to keep leaning into is that even having a hybrid model allows you to give more reach. And how many people do you know, even if they live somewhere, they travel somewhere else. And as someone who's done a lot of fundraising in both Maine and Utah and the Park City, Utah area, seasonal folks, like there are a lot of people that will come into the area. And I think that, they've started to make more investments in the last year because they were paying more attention when they couldn't travel there to the places they love to visit and play in.
Okay, let's move a little more closely to the topic at hand. And again, we consider you the first lady of millennial philanthropy, though at full disclosure, there is no man that's your equal. Tell us a little about the demographics of the millennial generation.
Yeah, so millennials are, we're kind of defined as the generation born between 1980 and 2000. So we're getting old is what I say now is we're, a lot of people tend to think about our generation as like, oh, we're 18 to 25 and very green and new, and we're not. Actually older millennials right now are really dominating the philanthropic space with their giving and getting and volunteering and all of that. So, that's the first thing to kind of call in is we're about 25 to 42 right now, loosely. And then the other thing is, we are the largest generation in our country. We just surpassed baby boomers, and we're the bulk of the workforce. So I always name that because I think it's important as you're thinking about corporate giving and building relationships to companies and looking at, up and coming entrepreneurs, you're dealing with this generation now. And also also to just call in too, that even if you're looking at not self-generated wealth, but the inheritors, the majority of inheritors are actually going to be older millennials or young Gen Xers right now. So thinking about that kind of as your target that's inheriting that wealth as well.
Talk a little about the giving capacity. What type of gifts do you think millennials, can they get into the space of major gifts, $10,000 and above, or give us a little context?
Yeah, so actually a lot of the research done by Fidelity Charitable prior to the pandemic, so I just want to name that and drop that in because I think it's important, showed that millennials, particularly millennial entrepreneurs, their median annual donation was actually $13,000 a year. So if they're giving that to one or two organizations, those usually, those kind of qualify as major gifts for sure. But I think what we're seeing more so in the research is millennials getting capacity. As I'm really, I'm a self-identified millennial, really proud to be kind of the serial connector, go-getter that I am, both on social media and in my personal and professional life. But I think a big part of that is that we have a different attitude around fundraising and getting access to funds and resources for the causes we care about. So even though we're seeing millennials maybe top out at $5,000, $10,000 major gifts as their max, what we're seeing is that they're not afraid to just blindly call up their CEO at the company they work at and go, hey, Jack, like, can we get together for coffee at some point? Like, I want to talk to you about doing a big gift to our organization because I see you giving to other organizations. So I see a fearlessness with fundraising that as I've trained other generations around fundraising, there can be a little bit of hesitancy to do that piece or to do that work. And Jim, I'm thinking of your book, Overcoming the Fear of the Ask. I definitely think that there are different fears that millennials have around talking about money, but I think that moving it towards causes that they care about, especially timely and relevant ones, they are not afraid to say add an extra zero to anybody in their path.
And I don't want to say there's any friction, but let's compare millennials and baby boomers. You know, in my book, I like to break the gifting cycle into 4 distinct phases. Who are you going to ask for money? How do we prepare them for an ask? How do we actually ask? How do we thank them so we can go back and they'll give again? Can you take a moment and maybe compare and contrast how you would discover millennial donors, how you would cultivate millennial donors, how you would solicit millennial donors, and how you would thank and acknowledge millennial donors?
Yeah. So the first thing, so I'll start with discovery, because I think that that's really important. So I think in terms of finding millennials to be a part of your work, the first thing that I usually tell organizations to do is to look to their social media and look to their corporate sponsors or the companies that support them. So again, millennials are rising in the ranks into higher executive roles within companies all throughout the globe. So it's really important if you have any company partnerships that you're looking at, what are their leadership plans? What talent are they cultivating internally? And how do you maybe connect to folks that you know with those companies to be a part of that by way of talking about philanthropy and the opportunities to engage with your mission? And then social media is always a good bet. Right? So as somebody who literally, Jim, was posting on Instagram 3 minutes before we started, excuse me, I think it's really important to recognize that, we're constantly sharing content and creating content. So you can find millennials and bring them into your mission by either sharing content or inviting them to share content about your work, or calling them in to create content, because that's kind of a nice little stroke of our ego to be told, oh, you want me to write something for you, or do a photo series, or take over your social media for a day. So I think that prospecting piece, it really starts with kind of cultivating how much we as a generation really want to be serial connectors, influencers, thought leaders in our own capacity and right. And I definitely, in terms of cultivating, I think creating the content, like I just shared, is a big part of cultivation. I get asked by a lot of nonprofit organizations to write a blog, or, would you work with these artists on a presentation for our next event? Or, would you take over our Instagram handle for a day and post things that are happening in our community that you feel like are really relevant to, telling our story around trying to alleviate poverty in Southern Maine? So I think the cultivation has to be really giving us a hands-on experience, and also mentorship. So I'll never forget this arts therapy organization in Boston. So harkening back to you, Jim. This arts therapy organization in Boston, working with young people, reached out to me one day and said, "Hey, Alyssa, you're a new donor to our mission. We thought it would be really great to invite you to come in and meet a few of our other donors who are more seasoned donors within the organization." So I actually it was carefully curated. 10 of their new donors that stepped in at the $500 level got to meet with 10 of their donors who gave it the $50,000 plus level. And I got another woman donor who was kind of a mentor to me, and it was an amazing experience. And I still give to that organization today. In terms of solicitation, I think for major gifts, I think millennials really want to see impact and vision and need to feel trust within the organization. So it's really important, if you're going to do a higher level gift, if you're going to do more of a $500,000, $5,000, $10,000 solicitation, that it's really important that you kind of zero in that moment on talking to them not only about the outcome of that work, oh, you'll fund 10 students in our program, or you'll support our mission through the end of the year, but what's the real impact? If I double my gifts over 3 years, what will you be able to accomplish? So I think that's really important. And then in terms of website readiness and processing gifts, we have an 8-second attention span. So
hey, could you repeat that? Hey, repeat that again.
Attention span, 8 seconds. So if we aren't kind of captured and we start processing our gift, and then we can do it within, I think it's 90 seconds, we don't finish it. So I think it's really important when you look at your technology that you have something really compelling, really specific and simple on all of your donate pages for us to just click, give, send it through Venmo, Give, Gab, whatever
Yeah.
our, platform is, our Apple Pay, and just move it on along. I have to say, I probably abandon at least 3 donation pages a week because I'm jumping onto a conference call, writing a blog, posting about my toddler on Facebook. So that's really important. And then lastly, for stewardship, and this is what I love about my generation too, we're really committed to giving while we live. So with other generations, we tend to see kind of waiting until you have your success in life, and then in your retirement, you kind of go into a phase of doing more philanthropy, doing more volunteerism. Last year during COVID, millennials actually surpassed baby boomers, with 93% of us volunteering versus 73% of boomers over the last 2 years. And I think we're just going to see more of that as we integrate more technologies. And we also see this generation really live into that idea of giving while we're living and volunteering while we're living. I myself have a toddler, run my own business, do a lot of speaking and writing, but I'm still the board chair of an organization and volunteer on 3 other committees in town because I see philanthropy as part of my civic engagement and vice versa. So I think we see a lot of that with millennials, and thinking about that in the stewardship plan is super important. How are you connecting them to long-term mission and giving them a variety of ways to do all of the things with their time, talent, treasure, and ties while they're connected to you?
Now, if you weren't persuaded by the size of, actually, millennials have become the dominant demographic in the American workforce. There's something called the $80 million wealth transfer that is going to come from baby boomers over the next, 30 years. But it's 68 trillion. I mean, I can't even get my mind around that number. If you take a $100 bill and pasted it next to each other, you could go around the earth twice. That's how much $68 trillion about. What do we suspect that millennials are going to do? Because they're going to get the lion's share of that $68 trillion.
Yeah, so the $68 trillion wealth transfer is already underway. We're predicting that by 2030, so within a decade, most of the majority of that wealth, I think it's like 87 or 88%, according to some Fidelity research, will be in the hands or in the stewardship of the millennial generation as we get into our 40s and early 50s. So I think it's really important, again, to be thinking about long-term visionary impact, and also having conversations right now around what, big venture philanthropy can do around the issue that you're working on, the cause that you're stewarding yourself as a nonprofit professional. So I have, I always tell my clients, kind of know what the long-term goals are, because you never know when that wealth is going to transfer and when it's going to be unlocked and unleashed. So that's why I think designing a youth council or some sort of young professionals network, or investing in social media, because if people start following you and engaging with you now, even if only 2 or 3 times a year, you really see active engagement. A decade of that and investing in it could result in a multi-million-dollar gift. And I've already seen that happen with some of my clients who, again, everything from our grandfather passed away, and now we're leading the family meetings. And so now, because we've actually sat in a position as nonprofits to do some philanthropic advising versus just pitch our own mission, we've said to them, let's talk about the future of higher education coming out of the pandemic. Yeah. And how can philanthropy rise in this moment to support organizations? That versus, oh, hey, we have a new initiative, or we need a new building and we're raising 1.2 million. What can you do? That's a very different approach to say we're really invested in how you understand philanthropy as a tool for change and community support. And I think starting those dialogues now are really important, because when that wealth transfer does start to happen, we're going to see millennials go to the trusted places where they've been learning and listening and engaging and building connections for the last decade to say, hey, the $12 million trust just came through. I want to give 3/4 of it away. What are we doing together?
Alyssa and I have mapped up 3 learning objectives today, and one I think we've already heard about: the giving potential of millennials, how to engage them, and then how to tap their leadership. I'd like to introduce our producer, Michael Largent. Could you take a second? Anytime, Alyssa and I, in fact, more than normal, we want to bring the audience on the screen with us. So you can either type questions in the chat space and it will give you immediately access, or better yet, come on the screen with us. Michael, can you talk a little about the mechanics?
Sure, sure. So like Jim said, there's two ways that you can ask questions. You can either type them into the chat space or you can come on camera. Um, if you want, you can just type them, and then when we stop for questions, I'll go ahead and read your question out, and then you can jump on and then ask it yourself, because we really want to get people involved and asking the questions themselves. So those are pretty much your two options.
And again, when we had an early conversation, you said some of your clients were ramping it up. The one thing, it was a wonderful year for the stock market, and the stock market is at, I mean, it had a little hiccup in the last week or two, but the stock market is the best predictor of philanthropy. And we already see some early data in the fundraising effectiveness project indicated that overall giving was up 11% over the prior year. We're going to get Giving USA, I think, around the middle of June. You mentioned charity, Fidelity Charitable. I mean, what is happening in donor advised funds? Fidelity alone awarded $9.1 billion in DAF grants. Finally, I like calling her Wonder Woman, Mackenzie Scott, who gave away, not just gave away $6 billion, which is awesome there, but it was given all unrestricted, all upfront, and she purposely focused on underserved communities such as African American, Hispanic, and Tribal American. And also the Lilly School is put out their projections and things looking very encouraging for the next 2 years. So I'm going to skip for a few slides here. And by the way, our audience, like the nonprofit audience, most of them are small. We know that 88% of nonprofits have annual budgets of under $500,000. So we have a broad cross section. We have CEOs, we got executive directors, we got board chairs, we got board members, we have volunteers and donors. We'd like to call this our learning community. And we have a little tradition. At this moment, we ask everybody to type in our mantra, which is nonprofit strong. So I want everybody to type in those words, nonprofit strong. Betsy, what are we? She's muted.
Nonprofit strong.
Okay.
Nonprofit strong.
Who's that?
Al.
Al Hartman. Hello, Al Hartman is with the University Health System Foundation Board. Alyssa, what are we?
We're
Nonprofit
strong.
We're nonprofit strong. And so, Alyssa, anytime you have a question, I don't know who's our friend from Huron Shores Hospice, which I think is that around Chicago. Where are you all?
Actually, Ontario.
Yeah.
Ontario, Canada.
Ontario. What's the weather like? We wanted to get international. What's your weather like today?
It's beautiful.
Okay.
Sunny, warm.
Well, no, really.
Yep.
Well, sounds like San Antonio. Okay, Alyssa, if anybody has a question, just raise your hand. And Michael Argent, in fact, you don't even have to do it. I think Dr. Hartman has a question. We'll start with Dr. Hartman before I go to my questions. Go ahead, Al.
I appreciate the Dr. Hartman. My father was a real doctor, and because of the Texas legislature, lawyers are now doctors. We have a doctor of jurisprudence.
Well, congratulations.
That tells you a little bit of something about the Texas legislature. I was interested about the leadership roles that millennials might play today in nonprofits, board positions. And do millennials probably, I'm just assuming that they may communicate better with one another than with a legitimate OWM, old white man, me. is that a fair assumption that millennials communicate better with one another? And if so, do you have any recommendations on how do you attract millennials to board positions and to leadership positions? That's
So yeah, so Al, I really appreciate your question, and it's funny always seeing this kind of like on a slide of like millennials versus boomers. I like to think about it as millennials and boomers. You know, I think we're all in this together, and I think that's why.
Alyssa, I'm going to edit that slide tomorrow.
There we
okay?
go. Here we go. No worries. But I think it's really important because, and this picture is funny. They're the women both kind of, you know, smiling at each other, because I think there's an inherent acknowledgement that we have to get intergenerational collaboration right? Like we have to figure out how to really honor everyone's perspective, whether you're a teenager right now who wants to be a part of driving change in the world, or you're a retiree in your 70s or 80s wanting to still make a difference. So I just want to call that in, Alan. I'm glad you kind of named it, because I think it's important. Like, I think that the communication styles are different, but I definitely think we all need to be working together. And that's where sometimes I get frustrated by my own generation. And I'll be like, can we stop making this like another millennial party at a brewery? Like, why is nobody here under 25 or over 40, right? Like, I think that it's important to welcome that in and just think about that, because otherwise we'll continue to kind of segment in the same way and not get diversity of perspectives. So I think it's really important. In terms of communications, I think that this is why it's so important as a board in the beginning. You know, whenever you welcome in new board members, or whenever you do any kind of retreat or team building activity every year, you really kind of invest in some sort of training or some sort of activities that talk about everybody's communication styles. On the board I was on last year, we all did personality tests and communication style check-ins in the annual retreat. And then we talked about it, you know, and we talked about the frustrations that there were, and we talked about the positive things that there were where we had crossed over. And we came up with some best practices as a group, because ultimately any board that you design is going to have its own unique culture and dynamic and makeup of human beings. And so making space to accommodate that and talk about, you know, the different ways in which we all process information and how we work as a team is just really, really important. That being said, in terms of what I think you're asking, which is how do you kind of bring in millennials, I will be really honest that I think this is where radical honesty and transparency is super important. So when I was invited to be the board chair of the organization that I'm on right now, I had been a board member for a year, and I literally was told by the executive director, she goes, we need more women and we need younger people. And she's like, and I'm sorry to tokenize it in that way. She's like, but I need some people to start joining and just really start to give us that perspective. And I think your perspective as both a woman arriving on this board and also as somebody under 30 is really, really important. So I joined this board at 29 and I became the board chair at 31. And, you know, I'm going into serving my second term. And so I think that's also where it's important too. It feels kind of icky and awkward if it's just like, oh, shoot, I sit down at the table and I'm clearly the youngest person by a couple of decades, or I'm the only woman, right? That feels uncomfortable. So I think just naming it is really important and talking about the need to have that perspective in the room. And then the other thing I would say in terms of attracting millennials to be on your board, this is where I think it's really important to talk about long-term impact, you know, and what's possible. So I think if you can have a conversation about, hey, we want to do this over the next decade, you know, I think that's a way to bring people in instead of just saying, hey, this is a board opportunity. I think millennials are more interested in impact and the impact they'll have being a part of leadership at your organization than they are even about the experience. So I remember doing board recruitment 10 years ago when I first started in the nonprofit sector, and I would get all these resumes of people who were like, I want a nonprofit board experience to build up my resume, you know, and I don't see that with my generation now. You know, it's more like I want to volunteer because I want to see racial justice, because I want to see poverty alleviated, because I want to see, you know, I want to see food security for the families in my community. I think we're more committed to that than we are to the experience of being a board member. So I hope that's helpful for you to hear.
Alyssa, if it's okay, I'm going to move up one of the really tough questions. Let's just say we have a prospect, a millennial entrepreneur done very well. He's been cultivated, he or she's been cultivated, and we're going to ask him, this is going to be a big gift for our size organization, $50,000. Does it make a big difference if he or she is asked by a millennial or a baby boomer?
So here's what I'm going to say is there's no one size fits all in fundraising, right? If we've learned anything, in all of our careers, I definitely think that there's no, I remember for a long time, I thought that, like, especially in my 20s when I was fundraising in Midtown Manhattan in July, which, gosh, it's hot then. I don't know why I was put on those gigs. I'm running all around the Upper West Side trying to meet at donors' houses. But, when I was doing that work, I always thought it was kind of funny that they sent me as the female fundraiser to meet with the women donors. And then I would get the women donors to talk to the other women donors. And I don't really do that anymore. And I think that this is a very similar situation. I think it's important that you connect on a values level and that you really understand people from a place of what they care about. And, again, like the long-term vision they have for the work. I recently got an ask from a board. Again, it was a curated ask, but I got an ask from another organization from their board chair, who was the first, who it was her first time being a board chair, and the organization knew that I had just stepped into a role as a board chairperson, so they had to reach out to me and say, "Hey, from board chair to board chair, sister, like, I'm just wondering if you'll support my fundraising and I'll support yours." And so, she's a boomer and I'm a millennial. That didn't really make a difference.
You,
it was more that natural connection. Yeah, I loved it.
I salute that, because really there's diversity of thought, and I can look very different than you, but we can think alike on values and social justice and our vision for a better world. If we have some nonprofits listening, you talked about the millennials, the serial connectors and networkers. What might be first steps for nonprofits that say haven't really revved up that engine?
Okay, for bringing in millennials to start to engage them.
And to engage the peer influence motor.
Yeah.
Michael, are you okay?
Yeah, I don't think we can hear you right now, Alyssa.
Can you hear us, Alyssa?
Yeah, I don't think we're getting any audio from Alyssa right now.
Okay, we'll keep on. Alyssa, can you type in? I wonder if she could just take off her earbuds and just go with the laptop microphone. Alyssa,
I'll send her some direct messages. We'll get it worked out. You can keep talking, Jim.
Okay. Let me hear anybody else. How about let's get some other questions, okay, from the audience. Kathy, do you have any questions about millennials?
Jim, I don't really have a specific question about millennials. I know that this is a group that for Haku, as we develop our alumni database, will be a big piece of it. So that is what was interesting to me about the information that Alyssa was sharing. So I've been more, I'm an S style, I'm more absorbing right now.
Yeah. And Al, the boards you have served on, have you begun to see some outreach to millennials?
We, I don't think would say we'd have it actually a thought out process, but of course, the health systems generally are focusing again on, or more on focusing on young people's health and young children's health, and the millennials who are in the 20 to 40 age group probably are the vast majority of parents of young children. So that certainly raises their awareness of the health industry and the health, the world of health, and hopefully we can build on that to build our relationship with the millennial generation, because fortunately for them, they constitute a very healthy generation at that age. Now, many do have serious issues, but it's a real challenge making the health issue a primary issue in people's minds. And so it's interesting
Pardon
to
me
hear.
for a second, Michael, I guess, could you send Alyssa the phone-in number? And I have slides. It would be better to have her audio than nothing. Can you send that?
I think she's gonna try and switch to a different pair of earbuds, and if that doesn't work, then we'll have her call in.
Okay, thank you. We got a little here. Let's take advantage. Who else is out in the learning community? Come on in. Is Don Gleason out there? Who else is out in the learning community? How about is Sandy Holt out there?
She wasn't able to join us, Jim. She wasn't at her house.
Oh, she's chopping wood or something like that.
She's probably eating lobster rolls.
Oh, okay. So we're going to talk about some of the favorite causes. Social justice is a real big one for millennials. And I'll tell you what, folks, we ran in this. She's going to call in, and so it will be just her voice over my slides once we get that fixed. Is there anybody else in the audience that'd like to come on screen and just share their perspective? What have they learned that millennials, what are the ways to attract millennials to your nonprofit?
Jim, if I may, again, it seems that
Oh, please, Al, go ahead.
as a generation, they're much more comfortable with virtual communication. You can walk into a restaurant and see a table of 4 young people, and each one is on their cell phone. And so perhaps
I think Zoom was a new word to us. It wasn't a new word to them, was it?
But I think the whole concept of electronic, if you will, communication, it's been difficult certainly for my generation. We're the old face-to-face, emphasis on old, but I think maybe we need to really be thinking about improving our electronic communication techniques to reach millennials.
I think that's absolutely.
Can you all hear me?
Who we got?
Yes, we can.
All
Okay.
right. Sorry about that.
Okay, well, listen, that's what you get for eating so many lobster rolls. Let's talk about, and I'll tell you, talk about the favorite causes of millennials.
Yeah. So I have to say one of the things that I see the most right now is that, millennials are really invested in systems change. So I see a lot of my generation investing in causes that are working to change the system versus more charitable causes. So in the last year, I saw a lot of my generation actually align some of their political giving as well as their investments with their philanthropic giving around really timely and relevant social, racial, and economic justice issues. And I think in the last year, there's just, as our country reckons with racial injustice, I know we're sitting this week is the anniversary of George Floyd's murder. I've seen a lot of racial justice initiatives that have popped up. And I've also seen a lot around gender justice as well. And then obviously, I think, one of the top things we see in the top 3 for millennials is also climate change and climate change mitigation, because we feel like the clock is ticking. But what I think I'm most excited about is that around the climate conversation, it's not just philanthropy. It's also looking at how we're investing our funds. I know that my husband and I just aligned our 401k to have ESG indicators on it, because that's really important to us. And also our spending, right? So our consumer buying power, we're thinking about what we purchase and where. So it's a little bit more holistic, I think, for the favorite causes that we invest in, but definitely more social justice oriented issues float to the top, and environmentals wrapped into that as well.
Hey, I don't know if you can see the slides. Let's pivot to the mechanics of giving. You said before there's an 8-second attention span. So as far as making giving easy, what should a nonprofits kind of audit about their processing of gifts? What can they do to make it as easy as possible?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that you actually process a donation on your own website at some point and time it out. how long does it take you to do it as well? That's one of the first things I do when I start working with organizations that want to do more of a tech audit and look at their technology and make some decisions about purchasing new technology or integrating a different type of technology. So I think it's just really important that you time yourself in processing your own gift in real time. And again, if it takes more than 60 to 90 seconds, you either want to streamline the process or you might want to look at investing in a new technology. So I just think that is really, really important. And then the other thing I think is that you give options that make it affordable. A lot of millennials manage their philanthropy versus, even give seasonally. So again, that give while you get is all year round. And I myself know that the only way I'm able to do $500 and $1,000 donations when I'm asked is by breaking them down into quarterly or monthly gifts and being able to set that up online. So it's just really important that you have those options there so that millennials can process their gift in a way that works for them.
Alyssa, I think you mentioned before that last year, and not that we have a competition going on, but millennials actually volunteered more than baby boomers. Can you talk about the nonprofits, the robust connection between volunteering and then making gifts?
Yeah, so like I said, over the last few years, millennials have surpassed baby boomers in terms of the percentage of our generation that is volunteering. And so I think it's really important that we think about that as a pipeline, right, for engaging and bringing new donors in. What I do tend to find is that millennials are really receptive to the idea of it's great that you're volunteering, but what's also really important is that we resource the work financially, either with you giving or with what we say, time, talent, treasure, and ties. So bringing in connections and relationships. And I think millennials really get that. I also think that millennials, we like to have fun. So I think that part of volunteer, not that I think every generation likes to have fun, but I find in particular that millennials really like to do organizing. They like to bring their community to things. They like to get groups together. So I find that a lot of, the serial connectedness, I had a friend last year at Liberty Mutual Company in downtown Boston. She organized a whole group of folks to go for a day and go tree planting by just sending out some emails and posts on social. And it just happened that one of the individuals who came ended up having a family foundation and at some point at the end of the year last year became a bigger donor. So you just never know with millennials being such connectors and organizers who they're going to bring into your mission and how they're going to give.
Al brought this question up, but I think it's worth repeating. Boards should try to diversify in every sense of the meeting. What's your advice on a board, say, that doesn't have any millennials on it, to go out and recruit some millennials?
I think it's really important that your board is designed from a place of really assessing not only expertise and giving capacity, but also lived experience. I was asked to be on the board that I'm on because it supports vulnerable girls, and I was a vulnerable girl, kind of sharing my story with you all at the top of today. So I was kind of brought in because I knew what it was actually like to, basically be kicked to the curb at 18 years old with $500 in a backpack. So I think that it's really important that we bring people in who also have that lived experience to our boards. And that's where I think it's, again, having a genuine conversation. It's not just that you need younger people on your board or you want millennials on your board. If you're really out looking for people who have certain expertise or skills or life perspective, I think it's really important that you approach people from that place. And the truth is, people across every single generation have been impacted by different social and economic and environmental issues in some way or have knowledge and wisdom around it. So I think it's important to kind of make the ask from that place, but also think about very intentionally where you're going to make that ask. If you keep kind of speaking to your own audience or posting on the same places online, you're likely going to get the same demographics.
Right.
So, be really thoughtful in going out. And, I recently started helping a client do some board recruitment just pro bono for fun because I love their work. And I've been posting on all the mom groups on Facebook, because, millennials are starting to have kids. And so, most of the people I know who have toddlers like me are between 28 and 35. And so, again, I think it's just really important to think about different places and spaces to share the opportunity to be on a board and not think that, we're going to come to your website. You need to go to us and figure out where we are and present those opportunities. And also,
Alyssa?
again, just being
Yeah.
radically honest. Like, if I'm going to be the first, like I said, if I was going to be the first woman or the youngest person on the board, just name it. You know, it makes it a lot less awkward when you're like, hey, what's up, token female? You know, like that just feels a little bit better than necessarily, you know, keeping the elephant in the room.
Alyssa, no easy questions. Do you think
No.
it's too early for nonprofits to be discussing what we call legacy and planned gifts, such as charitable bequests, such as retirement plans, such as life insurance policies?
Yeah. So I actually think that it's a good moment to just make sure that you are making your consistent and major donors. So, you know, say you have a donor who's, you know, even if they've given you $50 a year for 3 or 5 years, I think being really intentional, this is why like I love Young Professionals Networks, because you can download those lists and send those lists to them and ask them to connect with people. Just making sure that folks are aware of how they can give basically from birth to death. How can you give throughout your entire lifetime to make a difference around the cause that you care about? So I think making millennials aware is really important. I'm actually designing a planned giving program right now with a client in Maine. And one of the things that we're really looking at is how do we bring people in across the socioeconomic spectrum? You know, it's not just major donors that leave planned gifts. Anyone can put, you know, $500 or a property or, you know, their 401k or a portion of their assets after everything else is paid off to an organization. And millennials, you know, my husband and I last year, we did our will, you know, now that we have a child and during COVID. So I think if it's happening, I think you need to make them aware. But what I will say, which I think is the more exciting opportunity is, you know, I don't, and this is just, maybe it's me, but I find a lot of my friends and my colleagues, especially who work in philanthropy, are like this. I don't want to die with a lot of money. Like, you know, like I don't want to leave a whole lot to my kids. Like I want to give while I live. And I think the whole climate change moment that we're in is motivating that. You know, I don't have 40 years to wait to make a difference for the planet. So I would rather push to give it now. And that's where I think I see a lot of millennials asking, like, how much is enough and what's enough? And what does that look like in terms of setting it up sustainably? And that's where I see them managing their philanthropy, you know, during their lifetime versus waiting to give it away 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Great point. Hey, you talked about social justice being a hot button, okay? So say you're a nonprofit that's in animal welfare, say you're in the arts. So, I mean, what if you're not very close to a focus on social justice? What's your strategy?
Well, I think the thing that's really important is to realize that if anything that's centered on humanity, in some way, social justice lays into that, you know, and the idea of, you know, just making sure that all voices are heard and all voices are included, and also looking at the system, right? So, you know, I did a project a couple years ago about with an arts-oriented client, and we talked about just the need for arts and culture and who has access to creating art, right? So who actually gets access to being an artist or to going to a museum or to going to a park. So I think that in so many ways, there are layers to the justice conversation in every single thing that we do. And I think that that's where in your strategic planning process, you know, bringing someone in who is a content expert on racial, economic, social justice, more of an ecosystem builder who's looking at systems change, just to get their perspective on your mission and how you're making it and fulfilling it, I think is really important. Because ultimately, you know, even when I look at animal welfare organizations, you know, there's a poverty component to that, right? Like there's reasons why people can't spay and neuter and all of that. So I think assessing the system is really important, and not just being blind to think that, you know, oh, we're saving puppies or we're, you know, helping, you know, make sure that this art installation lives on and inspires people. There's so much more that organizations like that are doing, and I think it's important to have those conversations within your organization.
Alyssa, we know that millennials have an affinity for something called giving circles, and we're beginning to get our wrap up now. Could you briefly explain how a nonprofit can introduce a giving circle?
Yeah, so I really encourage this within organizations, and I actually encourage it as a little bit of a ecosystem builder for similar organizations and working in a similar region or place. So for instance, last year we did a little bit of work with a couple different domestic violence programs, and we said, hey, like, you're all just in different counties, but you're doing the same work. Why don't you bring all your young professionals networks together and do a giving circle amongst them and let them make some decisions around where they want to move the funding that they pool together. So I think that you can do it kind of externally, taking an ecosystem perspective, and that's a really cool thing to think about, because ultimately, if I have the ability to give you 500, maybe I could give this other organization 500, or maybe I could go talk to my company about a match to give more to the whole ecosystem, right? So the more educated and inspired we are, and we realize that our checks, have impact and legs, so to speak, I think is really important. And then the other thing I would say about an internal giving circle is, make it all about education. So say if you're a $50 monthly donor and you do $600 a year, we're going to do 4 seminars to teach you about this part of our work, this part of our work, and that part of our work. And then the last one's just going to be a big old party with, pizza and craft beer and stickers, right? So I think that it's really important that as you think about that mechanism, it's really about donor education and educating millennials to be good at philanthropy and to learn how to use their resources for change. Because I'll be honest, I had no idea how easy it was to shift my 401k once it hit a certain cap. To being invested sustainably. But I actually learned that by a nonprofit who was doing land conservation that brought someone in to talk to us about it. I'm going to keep giving to that organization, even though they taught me something else to do that's benefiting my life and my value set.
By the way, I'm showing the slide now that we identified there is gold in today's webinar. If there were 3 particularly shining nuggets, number 1, talk about the future. Millennials are the future sources of time, talent, and treasure. They've already proven that they're civic minded and they're motivated by social justice. And I heard Alyssa say about 3 or 4 occasions they have an 8-second attention span. So you better make your giving easy, quick, and fun. And by the way, we have a couple minutes. Do we have any questions from the audience? And
I think we had a few earlier. I think
Okay.
Sabine, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right. I think that she had a question earlier.
Do we know
go
what
ahead,
it
Sabine.
is?
You can unmute yourself, or I can just read it for you if you'd prefer that.
Oh, it's basically hi, first of all, but it's basically been answered. I was just curious as to if millennials prefer certain causes over others, and obviously we clarified that with social justice causes.
By the way, Sabine, what nonprofit are you with? We always want to learn about our learning community.
I am with Texas Sculpture Group, and we are an art-minded nonprofit statewide here in Texas, and we support sculptors and their work.
Oh, thank you. Okay, what was your question again?
It's been answered. It's about which causes millennials prefer to support.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Sabine, I think
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think, relevant to Jim's last question, I think that if you look at any moment of crisis in the history of the world, artists are the ones that rally coming out of it to change the cultural narrative. So I think there's definitely an angle for you right now if you're talking to next gen donors to say, hey, we need to make sure it's, nonprofit strong and also artist strong, going into the next few years. Because, ultimately the art that we see around us is reflective of the world that we're building. So I think that is like a really great angle you could find to making the case to the next gen.
Okay, absolutely.
Alyssa, we give a money back guarantee. I don't care if you're cultivating baby boomers, millennial, generation Z or double Z. The more you ask, the more you're going to get. And that's certainly a common denominator. And
True.
we had a great time. I would like to thank Alyssa Wright, who's CEO of the Wright Collective. And again, Alyssa, I'm just jealous. You're a millennial. I would have to be 200 years old to accomplish what you've done in promoting social justice and positive change nationally and internationally. So thank you for living the life of philanthropy and being a role model. And I have to warn you, when you do such a good job, we're going to ask you back. So thank you for the leadership you have provided the fundraising and philanthropic sectors.
Oh, you're so welcome. And thank you for the opportunity to be with you all. And please do reach out either on LinkedIn or send me an email to be in touch if you're designing sort of a young professionals network or a next gen giving community. I'm really happy to take a look at things and to support you on your journey, because I think it's a big part of your sustainability as we're now the bulk of the workforce, right? So if I can be helpful in any way, please do reach out.
I'll tell you what, can I suggest this, Alyssa? We are going to post right away, like in the next couple of minutes before we start happy hour, a social media post, which is a summary of your 5 key points. And we're going to put that on
Sure.
LinkedIn and Facebook. And then Michael's going to do a magic spin drive, and then we're going to post the recording and the slides probably about 75 to 90 minutes from now. So maybe you could follow up my LinkedIn post and just make it easy for people to follow up with you, okay?
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Jim.
Alyssa, stay safe. Everyone stay safe. We're not having a webinar next week. We'll see you on June 9th. Thank you to our learning community. Thank you for everything you do to make our neighborhoods, our cities, our states, our countries, and our world better. Thank you. And we'll see you on June 9th.